we're back again for another episode of Behind the Why. Welcome back.
Yep.
It always feels like it's been so long. And then sometimes it's like, here we go again. But anyway, what I want to talk to you about today and kind of bring up and just, again, inform the people in the audience today, this whole sweeping change that the president is undertaking now. As he, again, works on making America great and keeping another campaign promise from draining the swamp. Mm-hmm. And you heard about the new educational reform that's going forward. We want to talk about that this morning, but we want to put this in the context of what is critical race theory, why it's so important that we understand what it is, and then we understand how it's being used to corrupt the educational platform, more indoctrination instead of education. Mm-hmm. And then we want to talk a little bit about how that has gone forth and contaminated the churches even. So when we go again, start off with a good working definition of critical race theory, intersectionality, and all that silliness that go along with that.
But before that, don't forget to like, subscribe, share the conversation with other people, right? The best way is just to get involved in the conversation. Even if you disagree, that's even better, right? So we can start working out those ideas. So,
I was so excited to get into this topic, I forgot to invite you to share.
Yes.
That's where we are with this. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about that. CRT, critical race theory.
Right. Well, first of all, I think an interesting thing about critical race theory was my introduction to it. Because here I was in a master's program studying communication and constantly hearing about race and just oppression. What were other key words? So it was oppression, oppressor, right? Privilege, that's another one. Well, patriarchy. And all of these things would come up all the time. I'm kind of like, okay. And as I started thinking about like my thesis and what I wanted to do, doing more research, and I came across critical race theory. Now, in class, we talked about whiteness studies, didn't go deep into that.
Right.
And as I began to research critical race theory, I realized, wait a minute, this is like the bedrock of education, of higher education.
Everything that's being said.
Of everything that's being said, because it really seemed like this is kind of the focus. And even beyond that, really it's critical theory that is, because all of these other studies, feminism, it all has roots in critical theory. But to answer the question, what's critical race theory? It basically, the easy way to look at it, and I think how we see it right now, is really this idea that based on your race, particularly in America, the United States of America is racist.
So it's an assumption.
It's an assumption.
That everybody's racist.
That it's
or
racist.
Is it just white people racist?
Well, white people.
Okay.
but people of color can be.
But critical race theory really teaches that it's white people's problem.
White people. So even oftentimes critical race theorists, if they define racism, the definition would even say that it's white people racist towards people of color.
Thus, books like White Fragility, if I could talk, and all this other nonsense that comes out.
Exactly.
And I think the thing that, when I think about critical race theory, the thing that aggravates me as a black man in America is this assumption of victimology.
Right.
Is that I am just incapable of being successful. I am incapable of achieving. I am incapable because of some genetic defect.
But even so, it creates victims on both sides. So even white people who buy into it, they're a victim, right? Because, man, you're unconsciously racist, right? So they say, if you say you're not racist, they would say, as a white person, they would say, you are, you just don't know it yet.
You're just not aware of it.
And so you have to basically acknowledge the fact that you're a racist.
We're coming to this whole idea of this white privilege and all this other
white privilege, and then this idea of whiteness as property, in the sense of whiteness is something that you possess, and like people of color don't have access to it. I'll
tell you right now, the people I know, forget about the whiteness as property. They want to have the greenness as property. They want to make them duckies, man, make that money. That's where I look at all these athletes right here, right around with these $1 million contracts, multi-million-dollar contracts in tennis shoes and commercials, and which soft drink they drink, and how they work out, and which after recovery drink they drink. All this garbage out there they're talking about, and that translates into power. And that's the one thing we think about. Critical race theory denies the existence of what's really happening.
Right.
And it
flies
so in the face of logic.
That's what's so funny to me, because, we watched the RNC a couple weeks ago now. And if you look at the black people who spoke there, so a lot of the people on the left were saying, were they paid? Or these are just puppets? And it's like, no, actually black people can think for themselves. And every single one of those stories that were shared from these black people at the RNC totally would go, just fly in the face of critical race theory.
Totally
Because critical
destroys it.
race theory would say that, no, as a person of color, you're oppressed.
If
You
we-
don't
if
have
critical race
access to
theory-
these things.
If critical race theory was legitimate, Barack Obama never would have happened.
Never.
This is
Never.
the whole the oxymoronic position of these people who want to embrace critical race theory, and they're talking about on one hand how people of color don't have any position, don't have a voice, don't have a power, they're oppressed, they're put down, they're trapped by this system and that system, and nothing can happen. It's like you're on one hand you're saying that you're too dumb, you're too stupid to understand how business works, to understand how to get a loan, how to do a business, how to work a business, how to get a business loan, how to get. I mean, it's like you're so stupid. You need some mighty white savior to come and help you out, and it makes my brain boil when I think about people who accept this.
Well, and that's the thing about
they accept it.
It's everywhere. It's everywhere. You look at the politicians, okay, especially Kamala Harris, Joe Biden. They're speaking right into that same mentality. Oh my gosh, on the college sports thing, that commentator, I forget his name.
Yes,
and he's
crying.
bubbling and crying.
And I liked him so much too.
Okay,
He was so good.
and he was crying, talking about black people are so
players,
good.
And when the white players go into the gym, they really have to they go into the locker room. They need to just be quiet and listen what the black players are saying. And it's like, shut.
It shows
up.
to me. It shows the insanity of this.
It's
I'm like,
crazy.
people, what?
It's
What's
it's
happening?
Like, are you trying to tell me the white players who worked their butt off all these years to get a spot on the team don't deserve to be in that locker room? Just the black guys get something to say?
Right.
It's like, that's so stupid. Curb Street. I know I'm missing his name. It just makes no sense. These people talking. Herb. I can't think of his name now.
I don't know.
I can just see him crying. It just makes no sense. It's like everybody is on a level field. We don't all get participation trophies. You know, if I was to run against Herschel Walker, I would get hurt. Because he's a better runner than I am. If I challenge Usain Bolt to a 100-meter dash, he would win.
Right.
Because he's a better sprinter than I am. Now, if I judged all those people how good looking they are, I'd still lose. But still, what you mean you're right? You're supposed to say no.
Oh, I mean, I'm just kind of, I can see,
Well, my point is that everybody's not equal.
Right.
And so when we try to come in and try to make it all fair, then all we do is we destroy everything. And here's on that same leg. Now, this is what people don't like to talk about. But in that same line of stupidity, we have all these guys now competing in female sports. It's that same madness.
Well, and that's the thing. I think people need to remember, if you look at all the chaos happening, it really comes down to the same root. And that's what's and we talked about this before many times in the show, and it really comes down to changing the fabric and the foundation of our nation. Because I'm like, you look at it, they all, if I track the line from the riots, from BLM, from critical race theory, academics teaching it
all goes together.
It all comes down to the same base.
Right.
So I was like, but I think people, they don't assume that. We like to assume the best.
Yes.
And a lot of Republicans, I think, do fall
Are
into
guilty
that.
of being
of
blind.
thinking like, well, I thought, we assume people will act like we do. And it's like, not necessarily. You might be a nice, decent person, but there's a lot of evil people out there in the world.
Straight up. And then you go to the other side of you look at this and you go, you start thinking about the rights like you start talking about. You listen to what these people say, and they're acting as if they have a right to take people's property. They have a right to burn down. They have a right to cancel you if you don't agree with them. This is all part of critical race theory. So if any time that you don't agree with the mainstream or whoever the powers that be come along, they can say you don't have a right to think.
And I think it's such a huge problem with it is this idea of just validation because of who you are. So
Right.
really what they would say, well, you as the black person in the room, you can speak to issues of black, And it's like, no. Also, it's very condescending. Going back to like what you said, what? The white players in the locker room don't get to have a say?
They don't have a say?
I remember reading this article, and it was a teacher talking to other teachers on how to help the people of color in the room. And it said, defer to them. If you're talking about race, ask their perspective. Have them raise their hands. Give them a time to speak. And to me, I was like, this is so condescending. But it goes back to this idea that because their lived experience, they have the expertise in this.
Only black people, or quote unquote people of color, have experienced racism. And I know that's not true.
Right.
I lived a long time amongst my white brothers and sisters, and I've seen them experience racism. Here's an example of racism that worked when I worked as a police officer, especially down in Orange County. When I first shaved my head, and the mirror sunglasses were really cool because they were really great, that black guys shaved their head and wore mirror sunglasses. Mm-hmm. Zero complaints. White guy shaved his head, wore mirror sunglasses. Immediately complaints went through the roof. He's an Aryan. He's a racist. Why? Because they saw a movie once with a white cop wearing mirror sunglasses on Dirty Harry, and all of a sudden, now every cop they saw, every white cop they saw was a racist. And you're going,
that's also racism.
That's racism.
That's racism.
That's racism.
Right.
When you come into a classroom and you say, hey, guess what, little white Johnny, you got a 97, but little black Johnny got a 90, but we're going to get a position to little black Johnny. Guess what we call that? We call that racism. Right. And that's I'm sorry, but that's just the craziness of it.
And one thing, just to clarify my point, where I was talking about how they assume that if you're black, that you have the expertise. However, that's not even true. They don't believe it. If you're black and your story feeds into my narrative, now you have the expertise. Which then goes to the example from the epic time when Candace Owens spoke before that committee, or the what's it called? The Oversight Committee. Right? And she's like, you know what I'm expert in, the experience I have being black in America. But they didn't like her story.
Right. So they had two white women going to tell
trying to correct her
what it was like to be black in America. And she goes, no, I am the SME on this.
Right.
I happen to be black in America.
But because her narrative doesn't fit into that grievance narrative of critical race theory, she's not black.
Reminds me of the gentleman that contacted us a couple of shows back, wanted me to read this book on understanding being a black man in America.
Right.
I typed back to him. I said, I have a little experience being black and a man in America. Uh-huh. I think I'll rely on that. And he types back, oh.
Like, my bad.
Like, I forgot who I was talking to.
Right.
And so we look at all this, and it just drives me crazy because it's so stupid. Now, like in any good horror movie, and this CRT has been a horror movie, you got to have somebody who can come along at the last minute and kill Freddy Krueger. 45.
I love it. He's so
45
so good.
What did he say about CRT?
He said it is a cancer. He said it's a sickness in our nation. And it is, because it's at its base, if you read about critical race theory, it's in so much flowery language, the different stuff I read. They try to make it sound like it's to help people. But I was like, no, at the base, it's grievance and it's hate. And it makes people hate their country. And I've talked to young people at the university who believe, like young black people, who believe that America's not for them.
Right.
That believe that the American flag wasn't for them.
Or like the young lady you told me about that came to you and said, I'm so glad I saw you because I saw people with Trump stuff on it and I was afraid. It's like, afraid of what?
It literally, it breeds fear.
It's like, did Donald Trump come to your house and beat you up?
Right. No.
And this is what gets me, is that, and I had this discussion earlier, is that you look at the videos, you look at television, and who are the ones beating up other people? People with the red hats on are the ones getting beat up. You see people with the red hat, old people getting hit, knocked in the head.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because they got a hat on. It's not the people with the red hat on attacking people. Mm-mm. It's the people who hate the red hat.
It's like Larry Elder. He had that beautiful video talking about the difference between the RNC and the DNC.
Oh, gosh.
But anyways, they shared a story about...
Larry, if you're watching this, please give us permission to show that. I would love to have your permission to show that. Because it was so funny and so on point. But anyway...
people can look it up.
It was so good.
I was like, we can share it. It's no big deal.
Larry Elder. That's so good. That's so good.
But anyways, in the video... he shared this, or it was a news story that was shared about some dentist who was in Washington for the inauguration in 2016 of President Trump, and he had his MAGA hat, goes into this like pretty liberal restaurant, and anyways, he leaves a $450 tip for this waitress, and has this beautiful note to her saying, this is just from one American to another American, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, makes it to the news because that's pretty cool. And then they do a Zoom call with one another, the waitress and this dentist.
Right.
And he basically just says, yeah, this is about America. He's like, just treating another American with respect. And Larry Elder then says, he's like, see, this is the difference. And this is going to hurt people's feelings. But he says this is the difference, and of course not across the board, right? This is a generalization between, I'm going to say, the ideology behind what a lot of Republicans believe versus that of Democrats.
That's a nice way to say that.
Right.
Because, see, I would have just said this is the difference between Republicans and Democrats.
But
the way
not,
you said
right.
it, it's much better.
But it's the ideology.
It's the ideology, yes.
So what even this white dentist was saying, he's like, we're Americans. I love America. I want to respect other Americans. I don't see a black woman, waitress. I'm just going to be this white person to be nice to her. No,
right.
I want to respect and do something nice for another American and show her that, hey, I'm a Trump supporter and you should also be. That's like, that was his mentality.
And what it was is that he was the one that said this.
No.
He didn't promote this.
No.
She did.
She did, because she brought the attention, because she was like, this is so cool.
And so you look at it, as I always say, here's the difference between the liberal and the conservative.
Right.
See, the liberal wants to give that $450 away, but the liberal doesn't want to give their own $450 away.
Well,
so what the liberal wants to do is reach over in your pocket, take the $450 and
that's part
give it
of
away.
it. But
that's the liberals'
even
idea.
going back to this race idea of it, is more so like the liberals' mentality would go back to intersectionality,
oh my gosh,
which is in critical race theory, meaning I'm going to look for all these oppressed identities and uplift them.
Ways to just
so that story would have been so different if it was a liberal doing it. They would have been like, as a white privileged male, I really felt that I wanted to elevate her voice, and the best way to elevate this person of color's voice is just give her money, and and we have this moment on on the news.
But he would have talked about it though.
It would have been about identity,
and it would have been about the liberal too.
It would have been identity politics.
About the liberal too.
And
so this whole thing, I'm telling you, watch that episode on Larry. We got to tag that one. We'll tag it to this and that one of Larry Elders. We got to tag to that was just so worth watching. I'm just saying, it's good. But that brings us back to our point. 45. Said he's identified a cancer in America. Guys, I'm telling you, we hired him to drain the swamp, and that's what he's doing. He's going through this educational system for the last 3 decades have been about indoctrinating American students instead of educating them. And he has said, enough. Right. You're not going to do this at taxpayers' dollars.
I'm curious how it's going to go, because basically he said any government-funded agency that is promoting trainings based on like white privilege training or critical race theory, he said, And then he tweeted out, he says, and if you see it, let us know so we can extinguish it. I'm like, he's serious.
He's serious.
This is nice.
And
okay.
one lady said, I just watched his briefing he did on the Labor Day briefing. They asked him a question about somebody not doing their job. He goes, oh, I fired them. He goes, I fired them. He said they weren't working out. So I fired. He doesn't mind firing people, y'all. If you're not doing the work, he will let you go. Because he's about getting stuff done.
Right.
He's a businessman. And so he's going to rock it, man. He's going to rock it. So we talk about this CRT, critical race theory, and it has been so corruptive, not only in school, not only in government, but it has crept into the Church of Christ. And you see the same thing. Instead of preachers talking about the only true cure for racism, they're talking about social justice warfare, warrior coming and stupid stuff anyway. But you hear them talking about promoting this and that, trying to fix a problem with the human character. And if anybody should know this, a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ should know this. There's only one cure for sin, and that's the blood of Jesus. And when you see this coming into the church where we're trying to add an adjective in front of justice or add an adjective in front of the gospel, then what we've done is we've changed it. We're not preaching the gospel anymore. If you're preaching a social gospel, then you're not preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you're preaching a black awareness gospel, then you're not preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you're preaching a white supremacist gospel, you're not preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. You're preaching something else, but it's not Christianity.
It's not
Christianity. And we see this creeping into the church, and ministers and Christians are afraid to step up and say something about it because they've been made to feel like it's unloving.
Right. And I think, honestly, too, what we see in the church is this intersectionality that's come in, where instead of really understanding what it means to be a Christian, we elevate this idea of being like your identity being affirmed.
Right.
And it's like, no, that's not what it's about. Truly, that's not what it's about. Your identity, you become new, and your identity is in Christ. And that's what unites us as being children of God. But it's so changed. I see pastors elevating these different things, right? And they're misappropriating scripture. I've seen the he'll leave the the 99
to go get the one.
And I was like, that's for the body of Christ, not...
He's not going to go get the one to bring him back to BLM.
No, and I know they're talking about
Or
for black
Antifa.
people. They're like, see,
No.
because the black community is suffering, he's leaving. I'm like, no, guys.
I had this conversation with a number of people online, and we talk about slavery. And I said again, guys, slavery is not a black issue. Slavery has been a human issue. As a matter of fact, the Muslims are enslaving people by the thousands, if not the millions, in Northern Africa right now. That's just
and
a
in China
fact.
right now.
In China. And we got slaves right here in America. We just found those kids down in Florida, I think it was, sex traffic. Slavery. Okay, so slavery is not an issue that's only black people have suffered. And we want to try to embrace this here in America as if that makes us special. And it was like, stop it. Stop wallowing in the mire. Okay, we came out of that. We used to sing songs about coming up out of slavery. The old song, Lift Every Voice and Sing to Earth and Heaven Ring. That was a song of victory. They tried to make it something nasty now by trying to change its meaning. But that was a song written in appreciation for what Abraham Lincoln had done for the slaves and bringing people out of slavery and us coming into a new day of independence. And now we want to embrace slavery. So that was like the best thing that's ever happened, or the only thing that's ever happened. And now even part of this whole rewriting of the educational system, we've seen this new 1619 movement where we want to go back and say slavery goes back to, and it's like, okay, America wasn't a country in 1619. So nothing that happened in 1619 is America. I mean, that's just kind of crazy. We start getting all this stuff. That's what I mean. When this critical race theory and all this intersectionality comes into education, truth, facts, and history gets thrown out. It just gets thrown out. And so as the president comes in now and he says, let's get back to educating America. I know there's going to be pushback. The Teachers
definitely.
Association is going to fight like crazy because money is going to get cut and they don't want to lose power. They're going to fight like crazy.
And I feel so bad because there's so many young people and even professors who are young people themselves who have been taught truly to they wouldn't say it, but I mean, they wouldn't say it in as many words, but to hate America or what America stands on. And it just blows my mind because I'm like, they're going to be upset because I took a class and the whole thing we're talking about really this, you talk about rewriting history. They say because, well, the winners wrote history. So what about the losers elevating their voice really in the sense of it's kind of like they call it like basically taking a queer lens. And so we're going to like queer history. So looking at the history that wasn't elevated. And so they're the type of people you say, we're going to just go back to history. They'd be like, but that's the history of the winners, the conquerors, the oppressors, So I'm like, unfortunately, because these people have been duped. And it's true. Of course, the winners write history, Whoever wrote it, they lived to tell the story,
What's his name? Freeman.
But
What's his name? The actor.
Morgan?
Morgan Freeman. Was been interviewed some years ago. And I think it was Mike Wallace asked him the question. I heard you don't like Black History Month. And he goes, well, why is that? He goes, well, when is White History Month?
Right.
When is Jewish History? He goes, well, I'm Jewish. He goes, then when is Jewish History Month? He said, why can't we just be Americans?
Right.
See, this is the problem.
Yep.
When you start segregating and breaking
you try
things
to elevate
into pieces,
exactly.
you got to put one down to bring another one up.
Yep.
And so, it's just like when we were in school. Like I said, I took the course in school on Black history. And I remember thinking how great it was. And I'm not saying it wasn't because I learned things I didn't know in American history. And it was like, it's really neat to hear the rest of the story. But what we were actually hearing was American history. It was just a different part, a more in-depth part of American history. And so we had to learn that as the reality. And that has been the problem, is that this segregation of history.
Because certain things are elevated.
Right.
And
Tell the whole story. So yes, slavery was a horrible time in American history. We don't want to deny that. But at the same time, it doesn't define us as Black people in America today, no more than the fact that when the Chinese and Asians came here to America, they were forced to work in the mines or on the railroads.
Right.
They're not identified by that today. They're not walking around crying because some of their ancestors was put in internment camps during World War II. You go on with life and you build from there. And because we've allowed the political system to use us for so long, that even now in our educational system, we've come to accept the fact that we get taught lesser truths, and we embrace that as being our own. And it's not making us better. It's not making us
No.
stronger. It's not making us stronger as black people. And it's not making us stronger as Americans. It's not helping anybody but the elites. And that's what CRT comes down to. You heard me say it 1,000 times. It's not so much critical race theory as much as it is elitist theory.
And what gets me is like how often in the university they teach, basically teaching people how to become, what's the word? Advocates and
allies.
Advocates and allies. They're all about advocacy. And I'm like, why? Like, why? It's like, seriously, I feel like it's getting to the point where you could go and like major in math, something in math, and be like, we're going to make you an advocate. And it's like, that's not going to help me. Like,
well, let's teach kids how to count and add.
You know, like, I'm going to go study chemistry. We're going to make you an advocate. It's like, for what? Like, why?
It's just all craziness. Like,
like,
we've been on this horse for a while. We better get off and let it rest. But I do want to come back and say, guys, CRT is finally being brought to the light that it needs to be. 45 is dealing with it, and we need to support him. Call and talk to your representatives, anybody that you can get to hear, because the truth of the matter, guys, is that if we don't take a stand on this, this socialist idea of America will continue to push forward. This is not a new idea. They've been persistent about this, and they're not going to give up now. And they're planning already all the garbage they're talking about, planting ideas in everybody's mind about Trump's going to do it. And when they're the ones that's doing it. They're always accusing everybody else of what they're doing. So CRT, I hear the drain. The swamp is getting drained. 45 is doing what 45 do. You might not like it.
Love it.
As his wife said, you always know what he's thinking.
Yeah.
Because he's going to say it.
She's like, whether you like it or not,
he's
you're
going
to
to
know.
say it. So I'm going to tell you here, guys.
It's transparent.
CRT, critical race theories, intersectionality. Don't listen to what they say. Get behind the why. See what it really means. See what they're really doing. And if you look at it with an honest eye, you'll say to yourself, that's just stupid. So don't be stupid, all right? So until next time, what do we say? Get behind the why.
Peace.
Peace. Love ya. We're out.